In The Brothers Karamazov, Fyodor Dostoevsky populates the world with men who wrestle with morality, faith, desire, and conscience. But among the Karamazovs, one figure embodies a darker, subtler, and more insidious form of evil than any other: Smerdyakov, the illegitimate son of Fyodor Pavlovich. Born a bastard and raised in neglect, Smerdyakov is the shadow that follows the Karamazov family everywhere, the hidden consequence of Fyodor Pavlovich's moral irresponsibility, and the living reminder that a family built on sin produces victims and perpetrators alike. Smerdyakov's presence in the novel is quiet, understated, and often overlooked, but his influence is profound. He is not loud like Dmitri, not thoughtful like Ivan, not compassionate like Alyosha. He is invisible to most, dismissed as a servant or a fool. But his invisibility is a kind of camouflage. It allows him to observe without interference, to manipulate without suspicion, and to act without restraint. In Dostoevsky's moral universe, it is often the quiet, unnoticed figures who are the most dangerous. Smerdyakov is not just a product of neglect. He is a product of abandonment, born outside the family, denied affection, and raised in a world that teaches him he has no value. From his earliest days, he learns that the rules of morality do not apply to him in the same way they apply to others. He is tolerated, fed, clothed, and occasionally exploited, but never loved. This lack of validation forms the core of his character. He becomes a man who believes that he can do anything, take anything, and harm anyone, because the world has never treated him as fully human. Smerdyakov's relationship with Fyodor Pavlovich is paradoxical. He is at once dependent on his father for survival and profoundly contemptuous of him. He resents Fyodor Pavlovich's vulgarity, greed, and cruelty, yet he mirrors many of these same traits. He learns from his father that cunning, deception, and self-interest are the most effective tools for navigating life. But unlike Fyodor Pavlovich, Smerdyakov internalizes these lessons as strategy, not as farce. Whereas Fyodor Pavlovich performs, Smerdyakov plots. Smerdyakov's relationship with the legitimate Karamazov brothers is equally complex. Dmitri sees him as a subordinate, a servant, and occasionally a rival, but fails to understand the depth of Smerdyakov's cunning. Ivan senses something in Smerdyakov's intellect and moral flexibility, but underestimates the intensity of his bitterness. Alyosha, with his natural compassion, treats Smerdyakov with kindness, offering attention and care that the boy has rarely received. Yet even Alyosha cannot penetrate the core of Smerdyakov's moral detachment. Smerdyakov's philosophy is subtle and chilling. He is not a thinker like Ivan, but he is capable of absorbing and acting upon ideas in a way that is ruthless. He internalizes Ivan's assertion that if God does not exist, everything is permitted, but he does not merely theorize. He applies it. For Smerdyakov, this is not a question of rebellion or moral crisis. It is a strategy. He reasons that in a universe without moral absolutes, he can act with complete freedom. This makes him the instrument through which philosophical ideas become dangerous realities. Smerdyakov's role in Fyodor Pavlovich's murder is central, both morally and narratively. He is the killer, but he is also the product of the family's dysfunction and the ideas circulating within it. The murder is premeditated, calculated, and executed with an eerie calm. Unlike Dmitri, whose emotions flare into fantasy and impulsive action, Smerdyakov carries out his plan with precision. Unlike Ivan, who debates the morality of action but cannot commit himself, Smerdyakov acts decisively. And unlike Alyosha, who responds with love and compassion, he responds with exploitation and cruelty. The question of responsibility in Smerdyakov's case is complex. Legally, he commits the murder. Morally, he acts both independently and as a consequence of the influences around him. Ivan's philosophical musings provide the justification he needs, and Fyodor Pavlovich's neglect creates the opportunity. In this sense, Smerdyakov is both agent and consequence. a living demonstration of Dostoevsky's insight that evil does not exist in isolation. It grows in relationship, in neglect, in the shadows left by moral failure. Smerdyakov's psychological makeup is defined by a profound combination of cunning, bitterness, and emotional detachment. He experiences no moral qualms about harming others. His conscience is either absent or so habituated to compromise that he feels no guilt. Unlike Dmitri, who agonizes over intention and consequence, or Ivan, who suffers from moral clarity, Smerdyakov operates outside conscience entirely. This is part of what makes him terrifying. Dostoevsky shows us that intellectual brilliance, moral seriousness, and compassion can fail to constrain someone who is morally habituated to emptiness. Yet Smerdyakov is not simply monstrous. He is pitiable in his own way. He suffers from alienation and exclusion. He is denied belonging, affection, and recognition. His bitterness and cruelty are, in part, defensive adaptations to a world that has treated him as nothing. Dostoevsky presents Smerdyakov not to inspire empathy, but to demonstrate the consequences of systemic neglect, moral irresponsibility, and social exclusion. Evil in this portrayal is not innate. It is cultivated. Smerdyakov's interactions with Ivan reveal one of the novel's most disturbing moral dynamics. Ivan articulates the theory: if God is absent, moral constraints are null. Smerdyakov internalizes this, but he does not stop at theory. He operationalizes it. He listens to Ivan's ideas and interprets them as permission to act, and then he acts. Ivan's intellectual rebellion becomes real-world murder through Smerdyakov's hands. Dostoevsky illustrates the terrifying truth that ideas have consequences and that moral abdication, whether intellectual, emotional, or social, can be deadly when it meets opportunity. The murder itself is executed with meticulous care. Smerdyakov frames the scene, creates false evidence, and leaves a trail that implicates Dmitri. He watches how his actions ripple through the family, noting with detachment the chaos he creates. This cold, observational perspective makes him almost more horrifying than any of the overtly violent or passionate characters. Dmitri rages. Ivan collapses under guilt. Alyosha mourns. Smerdyakov remains steady, untouched, as if he is observing a moral experiment rather than human lives. Smerdyakov's death or disappearance raises questions about accountability, justice, and consequence. Unlike Dmitri, he does not accept punishment as a moral necessity. Unlike Ivan, he does not suffer the weight of conscience. Unlike Alyosha, he is not transformed by love. He operates in the shadows, demonstrating that moral corruption can be sustained when no one is paying attention, when the structures of love, justice, and responsibility fail to intervene. Yet Smerdyakov is not entirely beyond interpretation. Some critics see in him a critique of social and familial neglect. Others see him as the embodiment of philosophical nihilism made real. In Dostoevsky's universe, he is both. He is the logical endpoint of unchecked selfishness, intellectual rationalization without moral grounding, and systemic neglect. Smerdyakov shows us that evil is not only violent or passionate, it can be quiet, calculating, and procedural. Smerdyakov's life is also a meditation on social invisibility. As the illegitimate son and servant, he exists on the margins of recognition. He is underestimated because he is ignored. He is dismissed because he is deemed worthless. But Dostoevsky teaches that these invisible lives matter, sometimes with deadly consequences. The world often fails to see those it marginalizes, and in Smerdyakov's case, that failure allows tragedy to unfold. Dostoevsky does not allow Smerdyakov's presence to remain abstract. He is a constant force reminding us that moral and social neglect creates consequences beyond calculation. Fyodor Pavlovich's failure as a father, the brother's inability to fully recognize and guide him, and Ivan's philosophical abstractions converge in Smerdyakov. He is not only a murderer, he is a mirror of the family's dysfunction, a shadow reflection of everything the Karamazovs have failed to address. Smerdyakov also embodies the danger of misused intellect. He is aware, observant, and capable of understanding human behavior, but he applies this understanding only to manipulate and control. Unlike Ivan, who suffers because he overthinks morality, or Alyosha, who channels understanding into love, Smerdyakov uses intellect to avoid moral constraints entirely. He is a study in the consequences of moral disengagement, proving that intelligence without conscience can be devastating. Throughout the novel, Smerdyakov remains fundamentally isolated. He is physically and emotionally apart from the Karamazovs. He is socially invisible, morally autonomous, and psychologically self-contained. This isolation amplifies the danger he represents. He acts outside communal norms and outside the mitigating influence of love, conscience, or social responsibility. Dostoevsky uses Smerdyakov to demonstrate that evil is most dangerous not in the passionate or obvious, but in the hidden, methodical, and unobserved. By the end of the novel, Smerdyakov is both central and peripheral, decisive and enigmatic. He commits the ultimate act of violence, shapes the destinies of the other characters, and yet remains morally unassailable in his own eyes. He escapes the redemptive arcs that apply to Dmitri, Ivan, or Alyosha. And this is Dostoevsky's point. Evil can exist where redemption, conscience, and moral engagement are absent, quietly, invisibly, and destructively. Smerdyakov's story is a warning. He demonstrates what happens when neglect, philosophical rationalization, and social invisibility converge. He embodies the consequences of abandonment, the dangers of unchecked intellect, and the quiet potency of moral disengagement. Dostoevsky shows that even when a character seems peripheral, overlooked, or minor, the effects of their choices ripple across the lives of others, shaping tragedy in ways both immediate and enduring. Smerdyakov Karamazov is not a figure of moral grandeur, redemption, or intellectual heroism. He is the shadow of the Karamazov family, the inevitable product of neglect and abuse, and the living illustration of the consequences of disengaged morality. He is frightening not for what he expresses openly, but for what he embodies silently. In a novel obsessed with questions of faith, responsibility, and conscience, Smerdyakov represents the chilling possibility that when no one guides, loves, or constrains us, the human mind may turn itself into an instrument of destruction.